Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to another podcast with Amoda Maa. As you may know, my name is Kavi, and today I'm going to be asking Amoda just a few questions to open up a conversation. It's been quite some time since we did the last podcast, over a month, and for that we apologize, but it's been very busy in the Amoda Maa Foundation world and all things Amoda Maa teachings. So forgive us, and hopefully we'll be able to get back to a little bit of regularity. But meanwhile, here we are to talk about heaven, and firstly, heaven and hell. But first, I'm going to say hello to Amoda. Hello, Amoda.
Hello, Kavi.
Nice to see you again. So let me let's dive into this. I wrote a poem, actually. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kavi, and you will find me on Twitter posting poems very regularly under the handle of Kavi G. If you want to come and join me there, I would be delighted if you would. I wrote a poem a few days ago, a 4-line poem that says, "We enter heaven or hell in every decision, with every movement towards and away from love." So using that in some ways as a springboard, I'm going to ask you to open up. What are heaven and hell? Because I think we know the standard, religious kind of idea, but that's not what the purpose of this podcast or your teaching or anything that we do is about. It's about exploring something very different from that. So if I were to just throw that at you, which I'm going to do, what are heaven and hell?
Well, whilst what we are exploring is on a radically different or deeper dimension than the standard religious textbook, I would say that the religious portrayal of heaven and hell is a more literal, perhaps simplistic illustration of what we are about to explore.
Mm-hmm. I hope you'll explain that a little bit more, because I agree with you entirely.
What I mean by that is that if we take hell literally, as we see it pictured and described, whether it's the Bardo realms of the Tibetan culture or whether it's the hell of the Christian depiction, that is very obviously pointing to a place of suffering in the literal sense, a place where we burn eternally in the fires of hell, where there is torture, suffering, pain, and so on. Torment. And then the literal portrayal of heaven as a place of light and love and good things, sometimes taken to an extreme, portrayed as pleasure, sensorial pleasure, being with loved ones that have already departed, being able to manifest whatever we wish, stuff like that. Now, these are very, like I said, simplistic, dare I say, immature, at least psychologically and spiritually immature depictions of what we are about to explore, which is on a deeper dimension, which is the dimension of consciousness. So rather than being physical places that we literally go to after we die, what heaven and hell from this perspective are pointing to are states of consciousness that we inhabit in our life whilst we're still alive. So hell pointing to or describing essentially the egoic state of suffering. In the simplistic version, there's somebody out there, some being, some entity that is assigning us either to heaven and hell according to our deeds, according to our karma, or according to our worthiness, and that's where it gets rather distorted. So that's the place that we're not going to. Yes, we're simply just using that as a contrast to what we're speaking of. So let's get right to it. Yeah, hell as a state of consciousness, the state of suffering, the state of ego consciousness, where suffering is created by not knowing our true nature. Suffering is created by looking for fulfillment and satisfaction and recognition and approval and love in the world of form, in the world of things, in the world of the temporary. And so the internal hell that is created, although it's not always experienced as hell, but is really the torment of thoughts, the thoughts of grasping, the thoughts of rejecting, the thoughts of holding on to life, the thoughts of fear of death, the thoughts of, having a perfect life or being perfectly loved, and so being a perfect person, which accumulate over a lifetime or maybe lifetimes and eventually become a prison. Surely that is hell. It's a hellish state of mind because there's no escape. There's no relief, true relief. There's temporary relief, perhaps, in something that we acquire, whether that's knowledge or a relationship or success or whatever it might be, or a possession. But there's no true fulfillment in that. And surely that is the seeking mechanism of the unconscious state. In that sense, it's samsara. That's what samsara is. It's going round and round, craving and rejecting, craving and rejecting, craving and avoiding, craving that which we think will give us what we want, and rejecting or avoiding that which we think will not give us what we want, or that, what we don't want because it's too painful or too, So we live in a world of polarity, a world of an inner state, rather, of inner division. Surely that is hell. Yeah. And then we go trying to fix it, trying to create a better internal world and a better internal reality through positive thinking or fixing our emotions, changing our emotional state. And still we're still on the wheel of samsara. And essentially underneath all that, or part of the sort of driver for that, if you like, is a sense of unworthiness and a sense of incompleteness. Yeah. And that's where it sort of touches up on the sort of more traditional depiction or meaning of heaven and hell, because if we're unworthy, then we're unworthy to enter the kingdom of heaven. Yeah. And so we set up this idea of sin and guilt and so on, and unworthiness and an unlovableness. And really it's stemming from an erroneous construct built up by the layers of ego identity that this is not enough, I'm not enough, I must have more. Yeah, I must be more of something in order to be, So this unconscious drive for more fulfillment, more recognition, more love. This moment is never enough. Yeah, this unconscious driver, that's the seed of the hell realm. until it reaches some kind of tipping point, and then we seek freedom from that, and that's perhaps the beginning of self-inquiry or the spiritual path.
Yeah, there's the seeking of freedom within the suffering realm, which is doomed. And then there's the seeking, when one sees that even once seeking within the hell realm is going nowhere, that actually that's the seed that you're talking about, that the awareness that allows the distance to come.
Well, we seek freedom from the seeking itself. Yes.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that escapism from the suffering, for instance, in alcohol or drink or things, that's seeking relief. It's not necessarily seeking freedom. It's seeking relief from the suffering.
Yes,
and actually,
yes.
Those two things have very different qualities.
Absolutely,
really.
yes. No, I was referring to seeking freedom, the true meaning of freedom, liberation, self-realization, knowing who I am. But yes, there is escapism within the realm of suffering, which is the seeking of relief, as you just said. Yes, absolutely. And that's not the resolution, of course not, because we're going.
But it's almost like
on the same wheel.
Yeah, it's almost like we have to go through that. That's included. That provides even more grit, because if you try and seek relief often enough, and you realize that it's futile, then the shift happens.
Yes, well, the tipping point hasn't really come until that moment of the futility.
Yeah, that's right. When as you were talking, it strikes me that at least the Christian religion, it actually has such a beautiful quality to it. It's maybe externalized something that is internal, and now these days we're able to have the use of language. There's a certain use of language and psychology that can somehow unpack it a little more eloquently or a little more specifically. But actually, those religions are speaking to exactly the human problem, which is to be identified with the ego self or not to be identified with the ego self. Yeah, one being hell, one being heaven. So whether it's turned into moral behavior of worthiness, but we carry that worthiness and unworthiness within us. It is part of the struggle of the spiritual or just the human being. It is part of the human condition, isn't it? So
yes, I mean the true teachings, if you like, that have arisen from mystical and Christian and pre-Christian teachings, traditions, are all holding the same truth. It's only, as you say, in the sophistication or lack of sophistication of language that there's any confusion or difference. And part of that is cultural, historical of the times, and also that in it being handed down over thousands of years, it becomes ossified, and from there it's misunderstood. It is taken too literally or too simplistically. But I have no doubt, as much as I can have no doubt, that what Jesus spoke of when he spoke of the kingdom of heaven, and even when he spoke of sin, if he did speak of sin, are not the simplistic
no, for sure.
Sort of understandings that have been handed down, or pictures that have been handed down, but a true realization of the inner states, the inner state of hell and the inner state of heaven, inner states of consciousness, So, but that cannot really be easily handed down in words. Yeah?
Well, neither can it really be exploited.
Well, the state can't be, the actual inner state can't be exploited, but it has become exploited because it's become literalized, yes, and ossified. And,
I think that, you know, that because what I hear you pointing to is of something that's very alive for each individuation. Yeah, it's an alive inquiry into what one is giving one's devotion to, if you like, at any moment. Yeah, it's not it's not a palliative. It's not really something that you can just go to church and put your money on the altar and here you are, you're absolved of some sins, or, you know, that it's not as childish as that in many ways. You know, what you're talking about is a genuine struggle of each human being. Yeah, it's not on the level of behavior modification.
Not at all. This, you know, what we're speaking of has nothing to freedom, true freedom, or the freedom of self-realization has nothing to do with morals or ethics or belief systems. That's where it's got hijacked. So we are talking about an inner state of consciousness that every human being has the birthright to. Yeah, every human being. You know, perhaps in our culture now, it's more available. It seems to be, yeah, because we perhaps on some level, even though it doesn't seem like it, are evolving as a human species in terms of our state of consciousness. I know that's a little bit difficult to say these days, but
we'll get onto that in the question, in the third question.
But it is our birthright, and it's our struggle and our birthright. It's our own individual tipping point, and the doorway that we each have. So yes, it's an inner state.
And so
we've spoken about hell. Should we speak about heaven?
I was going to get around to it at some point. So tell me about heaven.
Tell me about heaven.
It's a good one, isn't it? Tell me about heaven.
Well, putting aside all ideas and images and belief systems about an afterlife and all this stuff, we're really speaking again about an inner state of consciousness. And again, I totally do not doubt that this is what Jesus was pointing to. The kingdom of heaven is already here, but you do not yet have eyes to see. That speaks, that speaks directly to my own experience of awakening, in that it's already here. It's nothing out there beyond us. It's here as the open state of awareness, the light of beingness. When it's discovered, if we have the grace, if we've been for that discovery, it's radical, because everything seems to change. The eyes through which we see seem to open. And again, that's not, supernatural. It's not like we start to see auras and things like that. We might do, but that's not what it's about. We simply see from an unbounded heart rather than the myopia of the ego self. And that changes everything. It's a totally radical transformation of consciousness. So then we meet reality, we meet life from such an openness. I mean, we can call it love. Even when, we go beyond liking or disliking, we just go beyond the division, the inner division that is created by the ego construct. It's like the ego construct comes undone, at least on the layers of belief and separation and guilt and unworthiness and all these identities that are false constructs. When those false constructs aren't there, it's like the windows have been wiped clean. So we see through naked eyes, through open eyes, through clear eyes. And that's very radical. It's a huge shift, and yet totally natural. And there is this realization, Well, it's always been like this. It's just that there was something occluding it. And that was just my sense of self as unworthy, as unlucky, as unloved, as not enough. That was, and that's not real. It's not here anymore. That I haven't changed. Nothing about this personality, this personhood has changed. And yet the view has radically changed. So it's, again, I say radical, and yet so ordinary and natural. In that sense, that's heaven, because we're at one with ourselves, at one with the beingness that we already are, at one with life itself. There's no division. Life and I are one. So therefore, there's no there's not the craving and aversion cycle, samsara, comes to an end. And I do think that's what Jesus was pointing to. And if he spoke of sin, I would say that that is where we miss the mark of that knowing and give our allegiance to the belief that I'm not good enough, or this moment isn't good enough. Yeah. And that keeps us on that restlessness. So with that restlessness come toxic thoughts and toxic beliefs. When I say toxic, I mean they're erroneous. Yeah, they're off the mark. Yeah. They create beliefs in separation. They create beliefs in self-righteousness. I'm right, you're wrong, or the other way around. So this is all missing the mark. It's like we're not in our true seat. We're not in our true kingdom.
Integrity is the integrity of the system. Has failed somehow or something,
Yes.
Not failed on a
it hasn't
level,
failed. We've sort of sidestepped it through these erroneous ideas about ourselves. That's sin. It's missing the mark. It's not like we're going to be judged and tortured for eternity. The torture is within, because that keeps us on this cycle of craving and aversion, and that ends up sometimes as addiction, toxic relationships, toxic substances, but also just thoughts being driven by the restlessness of thoughts. There's no rest in that, or emotions, or whatever it might be, or behavior. Yeah. So we've missed the mark. That's sin. Yeah. I think that's the true meaning of the word sin, missing the mark. Yeah.
That like forgetting essential, natural, whole nature.
Yes.
And it's as simple as that.
Yes. That's right. Forgetting of true nature. And the remembering of true nature is not an intellectual one. It's not a conceptual one. It's not one that we can read in books and go, yes, because that scripture tells me so, then that's what I am. No, it's the remembering is when we give our allegiance to that which is beneath it, deeper, more inner than the movement of the restlessness. Yeah, that's the spiritual path. That's the path of self-inquiry. That's the path of, we can go on and on. Yeah, I mean, that's what the whole teaching is about. But
and in different traditions, that calls, as you said, the mystical path of the Islamic, the path that for centuries has gone on in the, like Rumi came out of that. Rumi was all about union. Rumi speaks to what you're speaking of.
Yes, absolutely.
And the Christian mystics, you've loved the Christian mystics, some of them, and they speak to the union. Yeah, it is in there. It is there. Yeah, it's not as if suddenly you've come up with it, or the non-dualists have come up with it. It's inherent. It's been around.
It's inherent
for a long
in humanity. Yeah.
It's just that now it's flooding the collective. It seems to me it's flooding the collective. And the thing that I hear with, you know, as you've described with hell being in a state of forgetfulness, of erring, of missing the mark, and of being tortured by the self that goes round and round and round, and then heaven, which is the realization, partly just the realization of that, and you know, on a certain level, the decision, if you like, that's what I'm going to come to, that ends. But it involves, it's I say again, it's not just going to church to seek absolution from some other who has the authority over our destiny, our divine destiny. It's within. And that involves a great responsibility. And I don't mean moral responsibility. I mean, the journey is deep, is serious, right?
I just like to pick up on something which was, and I can't remember exactly how you said it, but I'm only going to use it as a launch pad, which is decision. Oh yeah, decision to end it. Well, yes and no. We don't make the decision to end it. Well, once we see, I think we were referring to the hell realm, the samsara.
Of course, yeah.
You don't make a decision to end it. You can't.
But there is a
hold on. You can't make a decision to end it. But you can give your allegiance to the truest longing to come home and rest in the true kingdom, true nature, true beingness. You can give your allegiance to that, but you can't end it through a decision. And that's, yeah.
I'd like to understand the difference. I think people would like, you know, it's good to understand or to pick that open a little bit, because there is a will. You know, we have a free will, maybe, and we also have an egoic willfulness, and also there's other aspects to it. So
when we make a decision to end it, and I hear what you're saying, because we're using words now to fine-tune something. And there's a truth and an untruth in all words. But when we, let's say, use the word decision to end it, that speaks to the self that applies mental control to get what it wants or to get somewhere. And even the desire, the longing, the awareness that there's something more free, more true, more whole and complete than this wheel of samsara that I'm on. And we want to end the suffering. Yes, I mean, yes, that does arise. Yeah, there's a psychological suffering that goes on. And that's what I mean by the tipping point. When that becomes a sort of, it builds up in intensity internally, it may not be external, but it's like we're sick and tired of it. Yeah, and we've tried this therapy, we've tried this spiritual path, or we've tried that technique, and nothing seems to fix us. There comes a tipping point where the seeking almost turns within rather than looking outside of itself for the solution, for the remedy, even if it's a spiritual remedy. And it seeks, it sort of seeks to go not just beyond the story, but beyond the story maker. Yeah. That's not really a decision to end it. that's an inquiry into what is more true than who I think I am. So it's not really a decision to stop anything or change anything, because that implies mental control and behavioral control, and then the seeking of, or the attempt to use various tools and methods and concepts to end it, or some kind of, that's it, I'm going to end it, and so now I'm going to be a different person.
No, I wasn't.
No, I know you weren't saying that. I know you know it's not that. But I think in the use of the words,
yes,
one has to be, delicate, if you like, or careful, that because that speaks to that. At least, that's what I've noticed, not only perhaps in my own self in the past, or and speaking with others. So because that's the default position. The self takes ownership of everything, even the spiritual, even self-realization, even awakening, enlightenment. And it makes a decision that, so we have to be careful, but I know that's not what you meant. I would say there comes a point where it's almost inevitable, the inevitable turning within to what is more true than who I think I am, and all the constructs and identities that come with that. I mean, there's many ways of saying that. I'm just using one particular doorway here. But it's like an energetic shift. And then there's a possibility of then giving our allegiance to that, which I guess is a kind of decision, but it's not from the controlling self.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, but I don't think one can really come to that unless there really is some kind of bifurcation point in the whole system. In the mind, in the body, in the emotions, and where it,
Is that, just to keep it relevant to the first question, because I think we might segue into a kind of bifurcation point, that's what you're talking about anyway. But is that turning? I've got to want to be careful, really careful with my words. I'm not very that turning away and turning allegiance towards. Is that the opening of the door to heaven?
Yes, it is. Yes. Let's.
And if it is, then as most people experience, it closes, it opens, it closes, it opens, it closes, it opens.
For most people,
for a while, for a while,
for
some time,
yes.
You're kind of courting heaven that you haven't really known before, because we're so living in hell. In actual fact, we live in hell. If the truth is what you're talking about, and society and culture is a manifestation of that inner division of egoic suffering, then we live in hell. It might not look like it, because it could be very beautiful, but it's hell. And then the turning towards what is heaven is actually a new vista. It's got a different fragrance.
It is. Yes. Yes, I was going to give a sort of personal sort of taste of that.
Yes, good.
Which is I like many people, in the unconscious default position, which is hell, even though it might not feel like hell at the time, seeking love through relationship, seeking love through approval, in my case, academic approval, seeking, well, that's recognition, approval in terms of being a good person or whatever it might be. Everything that is actually quite normal but unconscious. Yeah, I said normal, not natural. Yeah, seeking to uphold an image of ourselves so that we feel worthy enough. All happening sort of unconsciously. Yeah, and none of it brought true fulfillment. There might be momentary, temporary fulfillment, falling in love, getting the academic certificate, or whatever it might be. And at some point, because much of that was stripped away, and what was left was a sense of abandonment by life, and with that a kind of unworthiness, I guess. For me, that was a kind of tipping point where somehow, instead of looking for that love in the external, yeah, or even looking for it in the internal, because that's another way, which is like, I'll be a more loving person, therefore I'll be more lovable, or somehow I'll do some more psycho-spiritual techniques so that I can feel more love and love myself and all of this. So that wasn't the resolution either.
Modification.
It's self-modification. Or, you know, I'll try and believe that I'm lovable, or and
I'll work hard to improve something.
I mean, again, many years spent in that, and none of it really brought what I was looking for. I didn't even know that I was looking for it. But it was driving something, and what eventually came was just this sense of eternal suffering. That nothing would it was so barren, it wasn't whole, it wasn't complete, and so on. So I'm just giving that as an example of what the tipping point was. The tipping point was I stopped looking for it, either in the external nor the internal. I just stopped. And in that stopping, it wasn't a regression into, you know, feeling bad about myself or unlovable or giving up or resignation. It was a profound stop where the turning point, which I guess is a kind of decision, but it sort of decided itself. There was nowhere else for it to go.
I agree with that.
That's what I meant by the bifurcation point. It just reaches a point where it can't go anywhere else. It just can't go in the same direction it used to go in. So it almost sort of, that's the tipping point. That's the place where it has to do something completely different. And that doing isn't of the self deciding it, because it doesn't know. I mean, there isn't, it's not a doing thing. It's almost something comes undone. And what came undone was the striving, the seeking to be anything, to find anything, to all the things that we're talking about, seeking unconsciously of that love in anything, not even in myself. And it was such a surrender to the moment, to the nowness, without any concern for the self. And again, that's not just an avoidance or an escape tactic. It just stopped being concerned. Something fundamentally new opened up. And that was just the love affair with what is. The being here, naked with what is, just as it is. And that was that was the beginning of a whole new dimension that went deeper, and if you like, that was the doorway. Not all in one fell swoop until it led up to something, but it was, I'm just trying to describe that fundamental turning point, which is not something that we can decide, but something that we can be almost, I don't know if aware of is the right word. It is aware, but it's almost in touch with as it reveals itself. And then we have a kind of choice whether to turn away from it because it's unknown. That's why we can't do it. It's unknown. And then we go back to our usual ways, even though it was hellish and struggle. And then, yeah. Or whether we give ourselves totally, wholeheartedly to this that is not known, this that we cannot do, but is knocking from the inside. It's knocking on the door from the inside.
You see, to me, that now you've dissected it somewhat, and we've ascertained that this decision that the doer claims ownership of is not what we're talking about here. Then there is a certain courage to show up to something that happens, and it's not the courage of the doer. It's something way deeper than that. And I hear that in what you're talking about. That finally the meeting place of whatever karmas or grace or lifetimes or opportunity arose, and you stayed with the opportunity. You didn't turn away, which is not necessarily the same thing. You just didn't turn away from it.
That's right.
And it sounds like nothing, but is actually almost everything.
It is
because yeah, go on.
It's a willingness to die.
Yes.
To die as the self that I think I am. To die as the self that has been the foundation of my view, my experience. And what I'm dying, what I'm dying into is unknown. I can't possibly know it because I've not experienced it. I've not entered that doorway.
Yeah.
And so it was a death. And that's what I mean by not being concerned for the self. I was no longer concerned with the self and the perfection of the self and whether it was worthy or unworthy, loved or unlovable. It just wasn't concerned with that. So it gave itself wholeheartedly to that which was knocking from the inside, saying, this is the doorway, come this way, this is the doorway. It's unknown. It's like a death, you won't know. And that's because there was nowhere else to go. There was no other escape route. There was no other strategy.
Had you tried, do you think, at least to the capacity that you know, all other avenues?
Strategies.
Yes.
You
must have done.
Of course I had, yes. The strategy of avoidance of that, which is, if you like, knocking from the inside, revealing itself from the inside, comes in many forms, from the very ordinary strategies of just seeking pleasure or seeking something in relationship, and so on, but also more, perhaps more extremely, well, definitely more extremely, suicide.
Yes,
that's a strategy.
Yes, it is. Yes,
it's a strategy of avoidance of this unknown realm of no self. So I'll end this self that I think I am, and then I won't have to face it. But actually it's the same, because it is a kind of suicide. It's a spiritual suicide, but it's a beautiful one. It's a death of the false self. In actual suicide, we try to end the physical form and the psychological form as well, because we believe this to be who we are. But if you realize that that doesn't actually end anything.
Okay, so I want to a kind of applaud without inflating anything. There's something is quite it's not unique, but as we're talking about it, the nuances of how you were willing to stay and not turn away, instinctively knowing somewhere within you that all the strategies had run out. Because, and the reason I say that is because we actually work with a lot of people who actually meet that place within themselves that you're talking about, but there's some insidious idea somewhere that there's another strategy that might work, and so the turning, the staying doesn't happen yet.
No, and it's paradoxical, because it's almost like all the strategies have to be burnt out. It's like all the bridges have to be burnt. And again, that's not something you can do. There's this strategy and it becomes subtle. Yeah, and they do become ever more subtle. They're not obvious strategies like
heroin addiction.
Heroin addiction.
Or
that's
something,
on one.
yeah.
That's on one level.
Yeah,
but they start to become subtle strategies, more mental strategies. Yeah, the way that we barter with life, the way that we negotiate, the way that we, move away from ourselves, and so on. And we start to see that, but they all have to be, no, they don't have to be, but they are, that they're all tried. Yeah, the attempt to go down those little pathways keeps on going until something burns itself out. And how is it supported in that burning out? Well, either just by time, because time doesn't matter anyway. We think, oh my God, well, that's a problem, I should make this be quicker, but it doesn't matter. That's what we're here for in the realm of time, for this. Yeah, so it takes as long as it takes, but there's also support for it now through the amplified field of awakened consciousness that is available and expressed, not because of, but expressed through those individuals who have awakened to this. Yeah, and they are more and more ordinary individuals. Yeah, teachers or not teachers, it doesn't matter. But yeah, so there is support for this, which is what we do when we speak with people. We're supporting them. We can't make it happen for them. Neither can we give them the instructions to make it happen, but we can support them in reflecting back those strategies as they reveal them and share them with us, so that there's a kind of amplification of the burning out of it. That, I think, is really happening these days. Whereas perhaps, well, certainly even in my time, because I wasn't in the environment of it, but I'm talking previous to that, there wasn't this amplified field. It was couched in mystical terms or religious terms or poetic terms, and it was less accessible. We didn't have the sort of psychology, and I mean psychology on the deepest level, the spirituality that we have now, the languaging that we have now, the reflection that we have now, to be able to support this. But at the same time, you can't force it, you can't make it happen. You can only create the environment for it.
And and for the individual, to have the longing, in a sense, to, regardless of the field, regardless of anyone else, regardless of the tyranny of the mind or the culture, to turn again and again towards heaven.
Yes. Well, that is, yes. It's, nobody can do it on the behalf of anybody else. But as it's reflected back, through life itself, yeah, then that gets amplified anyway, so that the longing, which is a sort of vertical longing rather than a seeking
Mm-hmm.
of anything on the horizontal,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it becomes more inviting, more, if you like, seductive. It calls us more and more. Yeah, there's something in that. There's some nectar, there's some sweetness. Yeah, we may not know what it is, but it yeah, sort of opens its hand to us. And then perhaps more and more the individual turns towards that within themselves.
In a way, I think, because we're not going to get the chance to move on to the question that I was going to ask about the specifically about the bifurcation point. I mean, we've actually been talking about that. We segued from what, the descriptions or the pointings to heaven and hell into the bifurcation point that, is the turning away from or the turning towards. And, but
well, yes, I don't think you can speak about one without the other.
Yeah, right. I agree. Otherwise, they just remain kind of descriptive.
Yes, I mean, the juncture of heaven and hell is the bifurcation point. So, yeah.
But it's almost like, just continuing for a minute about what you were talking about at the end there. There's the what I love about what you're doing and what we're talking about is that it's actually somehow bringing the spiritual path back into its naturalness, almost into its ordinariness, without deflating it, without reducing it to anything, because it is exalted in many ways, but it's not exalted in the way that it's been sort of talked about in a way. And the other thing is that the world itself at the moment is sliding in many ways into such a chaotic disorder. There's so much shadowy stuff rising to the surface that actually is a large component, or a beautiful invitation to this that you're talking about.
Yes, because the hell of the world, and when I say world, not just the world sort of out there in terms of socio-political, economic disorder or collapse, but including that, but our world, our immediate world, whether that's the world of relationship, the things we have, the things we do, the people we know, all of that, that's the world. It just extends outwards and outwards. The world in that sense is always a catalyst or invitation for this turning within. It is an amplifier through the suffering that we experience, through the loss, through the struggle, through the suffering that we see, through the fear of collapse, through the fear of breakdown, whether it's personal breakdown, relationship breakdown, financial breakdown, or worldly breakdown, global breakdown. Through all of that, we're invited, although that invitation is not often taken up, but invited to seek peace, freedom that is not found in that. Yeah, so that does amplify, or the potential for that bifurcation point, because there's no resolution on that level. It has to start from within, because that world that we see, even our own world through the world of our relationships and so on, and our own everyday lives, is an external manifestation of or expression of that internal state of consciousness. Yeah? If there is, if you like, a missing of the mark within, yeah, then we are going to inevitably be involved in codependent relationships where we're seeking that love from the other because we don't know our true nature. We're going to be seeking success in order to feel better about ourselves, more worthy. And all of these are prone to failure, coming and going, and it doesn't bring the fulfillment that we seek. So the world and the collective world, the global world, is just a collective reflection of that state of consciousness.
I think also there's a growing field, maybe since spirituality came over in such a huge swathe, particularly in a way over to America, there's a growing field of people who who have seen that there's the satisfaction of the shiny things, the satisfaction of the codependent things has almost run its course on a certain collective level. And that creates a kind of division within people, those who grasp more at the shiny things, if you like, and those who say innately there's something dissatisfying about this. And that very realization about this dissatisfaction of the hamster wheel that society rolls along is actually the collective bifurcation point that we're at.
Yes,
and that's a beautiful thing.
One, yes. Yeah? Yes.
Because then it actually invites the very thing that you're talking about, the very conversation. This is conversation that we're talking about. It's very deep and a very, very natural.
Yes. And I don't know if we're moving towards the closure, yes. But I'd just like to perhaps finish up with saying that on this point, that this seeing of the collective unconscious playing itself out, it is not, and the sort of bifurcation point where we're not grasping at that, the shiny things, or grasping at the fear, both of which are missing the mark. It doesn't mean that we're avoiding the world or removing ourselves or hiding from the world. It means that from the new dimension, if we enter it, if we know it, if we're willing to discover it, from the kingdom of heaven, the inner kingdom, we move into the world, whether that world is our immediate environment or the larger environment. We move into the world from the place of the kingdom, from the wholeness that we are, from the enoughness that we are. And then we move into the world. So it's not that we're removed from it. We can still do, we can still relate, we can still operate, we can still function. In fact, we do. We just function in a whole different way from wholeness. And that changes our immediate world, our immediate environment. And it changes the greater environment when the collective is also moving in the world from this.
This is a return to love.
Well, of Course in Miracles.
Not A Course in Miracles, but of course, a little bit of Course in Miracles. It is a return to love. It's nothing despicable or naive or anything about saying the boldest thing that could ever be said. We live from living from love. Living from love's wholeness is the most radical, brave, warrior-like thing I could ever imagine saying. And I do say it's wow. But that's what you're talking about, ultimately. Thank you. That was a very beautiful conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope everybody else enjoyed it in some way. And I think we'll finish then, Amoda.
I think we will.
Thank you very much for listening, everybody. We look forward to seeing you again sometime. Don't forget to check out Amoda's website, AMODA'Maa.com. And remember, I'm on Twitter, Kavi G, if you want some poetry. And we look forward to not leaving it too long before we do another podcast. And may you be well, may you be blessed, may you turn towards heaven again and again and again. And take care. Over and out. Bye-bye.